I think it's time we start talking about the Yu-Gi-Oh! Ban list class. It is incredibly important for the growth of a Yu-Gi-Oh! Player to not only be able to accurately assess the Yu-Gi-Oh! Meta that's happening right now, but also be able to address potential fixes for your game. In case you guys didn't know who I am, hi, I'm TheCaliEffect, your professor for this particular lesson. And no, there won't be a test at the end of the video, but there will be a worksheet that I need every single one of you guys to be able to participate in order to make you a better Yu-Gi-Oh! Player. In today's video, we're going to be talking about the Yu-Gi-Oh! Meta in depth and also talk about some hits that could happen on the next ban list that may change the entire card game. Let's go ahead and jump on in. What's going on with ya, big dog? And it is an amazing day for Yu-Gi-Oh! I hope that's your day phenomenal. But if it isn't, don't let what happened at the beginning of your day ruin the rest of your day. Now class, in order to talk about how to fix the Yu-Gi-Oh! Meta, it's very important to understand the problems within the Yu-Gi-Oh! Meta. Right now, we know that Yugioh is the de facto best deck in the game, and it's one of the most powerful strategies in the game because it's filled with one-card combos, but more importantly, it's a strategy that can be intermingled with other engines to give it variance. Take, for example, players are moving back to pure Yugioh, but that's just simply because other players have picked up on how to beat Fiendsmith and Mitsurugi Yugioh. Really powerful strategies in their own right. Some players may not admit it, but it becomes incredibly hard to prepare for a deck when there's so many different variants of the strategy with different outcomes and ways to be able to beat those particular strategies. Some cards may be really good against one version, but incredibly weak against the next. Now, the next best deck in Yu-Gi-Oh! I would say it's more of a 1A, 1B situation, as opposed to a best deck and second best deck is easily Malice. First, Malice is the strongest Yu-Gi-Oh! Strategy to be able to counter Yugioh. A deck that can play Dimension Shifter and Bestial monsters, which are pretty good against the other engines of Yugioh, allowing the other cards in Malice to strictly focus on the Yugioh monsters. It also helps that Shifter and Bestials help Malice in themselves and are really good against other powerful strategies in the meta. But the biggest thing that separates these decks as 1A and 1B apart from the other Yu-Gi-Oh! Strategies in the format is that these decks are hyper competitive. Both of these strategies have multiple one-card combos and can oftentimes make your opponent's interruptions look really silly. It's kind of like that time where you thought that that girl was into you, so you asked her out and she gave you that face. Who am I kidding? You don't talk to girls. But while the other strategies can compete with the correct player and the correct cards and the correct timing, it can have a point where it feels like the stage is unset and Yugioh and Malice are up here and the other decks are right here. That's where the ban list comes in. But right now in Yu-Gi-Oh! It feels like the best decks in the game, Yugioh and Malice, are up here and the other decks are about right here. To make matters worse, when Maze of the Masters comes out, there is a new card called 7th Tachyon, which is going to make Yugioh more consistent. Giving power to a strategy that is already considered the best deck in the game would probably put it into tier 0 status. But that's why a ban list is not only important, it's pretty much necessary at this point. In this video, I'm going to be talking about what I think is going to be the perfect moves for the ban list, hits that will address Yu-Gi-Oh! And keep it in a way where it's not ridiculously overpowered with 10-minute Yu-Gi-Oh! Turns, and also allowing other decks to compete. This is not a prediction list. This is an attempt to fix the Yu-Gi-Oh! Meta. I want you guys to either add on or take off to this particular perfect ban list or make one of your own. One thing that I don't want you guys to do is stay at that Slifer Slacker level. We uplift, we elevate, and we get to only Obelisk soon enough. And probably you get to my rank, which is Black Jacket. But enough of my yapping for the lecture. I'm pretty sure you guys use timestamps, and for the people that didn't understand the very beginning portion, class, just go ahead and laugh at those Slifer Slackers. Let's go ahead and start off what I think should be banned to be able to make a perfect Yu-Gi-Oh! Meta. One of the biggest problems in Yu-Gi-Oh! Are engines. Engines like the Bestials, Fiendsmith, or Kashtira feel really bad when they can be just splashed in any deck, especially the best decks in the game. It actually disincentivizes players to play hand traps and is also a big reason why we are facing one of the hugest problems in Yu-Gi-Oh! Dealing with 20-minute turn ones. In order to combat this particular situation, I think one of the best things to do is to ban Fable Luri. I sat there long and hard and thought about actually hitting the Fiendsmith engine, but then I realized one thing that every single Yu-Gi-Oh! Strategy that played Fiendsmith have in common. Every single one of these Yu-Gi-Oh! Strategies abuses the fact that it can special summon a free light Fiend monster to the side of the field. This essentially means that a Fiendsmith engine requires zero commitment from a Yu-Gi-Oh player in order to operate, unless you just straight up ban the card that allows players to get free will estate. Personally, I think that this addresses the Fiendsmith engine in the best way possible, because players now have to rely on Evil Storm Excited Knight or Underworld Goddess to be able to commit to their combo, but you have to keep in mind that requires 2 monsters and sometimes can be your entire normal summon. Unfortunately, all 5 Fable players will have to suffer for this particular situation, but from what I can see in later Fable builds, this card isn't as important, unless they were playing Fable Fiendsmith. Now, I'm not done there. I also noticed another really huge thing about Yu-Gi-Oh! The newer strategies in the game are not graveyard reliant whatsoever. I want you guys to think of strategies like Malice or Yugioh, even Blue Eyes, strategies that aren't necessarily tied to the graveyard, but all of the other strategies are. Because of this, and this being a Xseed heavy format, I think the next card that should be banned is Abyss Dweller. In my opinion, the OCG got this 100% right. Abyss Dweller really doesn't require any intensive skill. It's a floodgate Yu-Gi-Oh card similar to Skill Drain, Summon Limit, There Can Be Only One, and others. The only difference is that Abyss Dweller is searchable. Putting 2 level 4 monsters on your side of the field can guarantee that your opponent cannot play Yu-Gi-Oh! If they're playing a non-new Yu-Gi-Oh! deck. Unfortunately, the commitment to make Abyss Dweller is way too easy in comparison when it comes out, so this is a card that has to go in the perfect ban list. Now, I noticed I just gave a huge boost to graveyard reliant decks, and one on my list is Mermail. I think even with the Blue Eyes cards coming out, Mermail is one of the strongest strategies in the game, and one of Mermail's most powerful things is being able to hand loop the opponent, preventing them from playing Yu-Gi-Oh before they start. With that being said, I also think Molaglacia, the Elemental Lord, also has to be banned. This one I personally was really iffy on, but when you start to look at the number and statistics, Mermail only struggles because of Abyss Dweller. I personally have no interest in creating a format where Yugioh and Malice become weaker Yu-Gi-Oh strategies only to allow one of the older strategies to usurp another deck because the floodgate is not easily accessible. Molaglacia, the Elemental Lord, discourages players from playing a board breaker style of Yu-Gi-Oh decks because these decks automatically get curb stomped by this particular sequencing. And I think we can all agree that there's no skill in being hand looped, especially if you don't have the counter or are forced to play counter so you don't get hand looped. Mermail players may hate me and love me, but Malice players are probably going to hate me a little bit more too. I'm not done banning cards just yet. This is probably the most cards I've ever banned on a perfect ban list, but my last card is going to be Nightmare Griffin. If you guys haven't noticed with this particular ban list, I haven't addressed Yugioh or Malice directly. One thing that I really wanted to do is address the assertion of dominance that these strategies have on some of the older strategies in the game. Unless your deck is modernized, it can become incredibly hard to deal with a Nightmare Griffin in the main monster zone on opening turn. And also I noticed one of the weirdest things about Malice is that there's not a single busted card that's printed as Malice. It's what you can do with the cards that makes it really strong. I think banning Nightmare Griffin is one of the smartest choices of all time because this card has been involved in so many ridiculous situations, like searching cards like Anti-Spell Fragrance to your side of the field. It genuinely is only a matter of time before this card legitimately does get banned, and it'll probably be on my prediction list. Now, I don't know if you guys are liking my ban list just yet, or if you think it's the worst ban list in the world, but we're gonna move on to Limited, and the first thing I'm going to hit is Yugioh. Yugioh is the strongest Yugioh card that the deck has to offer. And with the new 7th Tachyon spell card, the strategy not only gets stronger, it gets more ridiculous. I think one of the biggest problems that we're gonna have when making this perfect ban list is that we want to hit Yugioh on the way where we forced Yugioh players to just play Yugioh. Of course, I think it's perfectly fine for it still to be a strong deck, but I also think you'll be hard pressed to hit another card in Yugioh that would make more sense. Hidden Yugioh makes 7th Tachyon more valuable, which in turn forces players more towards the Xseed dynamic of Yugioh. It also gives Yugioh less 1-card counters to the situation that your opponent can put a Yugioh player in. I think that this is one of the only hits needed for Yugioh, but go ahead and let me know what do you think about that. Next, I'm going to be bringing a couple cards off of the ban list. Both Nightmare Mermaid and Heavy Storm are going to be coming off. Ironically, Nightmare Mermaid introduced a similar problem to what we had with Fiendsmith. With Nightmare Mermaid, any 2 cards plus a card to discard from your hand is full Orcus combo. But I think you guys are starting to understand the problem with that. In modern Yu-Gi-Oh, not only are there more counters to the Nightmare combo, it is an infinitely worse strategy than the Fiendsmith concept. I don't think that many decks will be splashing the Orcus Nightmare strategy inside of their deck, and after extensive testing with and against it on Master Duel, it's one of the safer cards to come off the ban list. Same with Heavy Storm. Heavy Storm doesn't provide too many situations where it's beneficial for you to destroy your own cards. In actuality, Heavy Storm will probably be used for its intents and purposes, destroying your opponent's spell and trap cards while having the drawback of losing your own. The Heavy Storm limit is going to be a soft counter to back row heavy Yu-Gi-Oh strategies that may take over in a slower paced Yu-Gi-Oh game. I thought long and hard about the last limit that I think should happen, and one of the biggest things that really bothered me was that I hit a lot of Yugioh cards, directly and indirectly, but I didn't address Malice. Malice is one of those weird Yu-Gi-Oh strategies where I actually think is perfectly balanced. The Malice cards. They consistently lock you into Link monsters in order to tap into their massive potential. You need to be locked into Cyberse often. The deck can be disrupted and can't mix really well with other strategies. But one of the biggest things that it has over other Yu-Gi-Oh strategies is that it's not graveyard reliant, and to add more to it, it can be the reason that some of the older strategies can be gate kept out of competing. So with that being said, instead of directly hitting any Malice cards, I think Dimension Shifter to 1 is the correct move here. Because I'm taking away so much power from the best decks in the game, I thought it would only be appropriate to take away power from a card that almost can't be countered. When you activate and resolve the effect of Dimension Shifter, it can feel like an auto win. It can feel like one of the sackiest moments where you're punished for strictly playing a deck that just so happens to use a mechanic that is widely used in Yu-Gi-Oh! Before, I was against it because the punish was that it wasn't great against non-graveyard reliant decks, but since Malice benefits from Dimension Shifter itself, this is a card that could be limited to 1 to have players think if they want to risk that 1 copy of Dimension Shifter in their deck to potentially maybe get a win. It definitely gives those deck building decisions, but I can see players that may want it banned. Now, moving on to semi-limited, I did say that I'm not hitting any more Malice cards. And it's simply because Malice has so many counters, it feels kind of like how Branded or Labyrinth is. It could never be the de facto best deck in Yu-Gi-Oh! Not only are the Charmy cards really good against this deck, there's Artifact Lancia, Chaos Hunter, and a plethora of other cards that prevent Malice from being the dominant deck in the game. It's what I would call a well-designed archetype with clear weaknesses. Start to catch the point, Konami. On the semi-limited, I do have Bonfire, another hit to Yugioh. What's really weird about this Bonfire hit is that Pyro monsters have been getting ridiculously strong. It's kind of weird how Bonfire is stronger than Reinforcement of the Army, which is another reason why I'm saying Reinforcement of the Army to 2. As you guys can see, I'm starting to lay the groundwork for bringing down some of the top decks in the game, but I'm also bringing up some of the other decks. Instead of having a format where there's the strongest decks right here, and there's a limited amount of strategies that can be right here and can possibly compete, I would like all of the Yu-Gi-Oh strategies to be closer to here. Next for semi-limited is Phantom Yubel. Phantom Yubel is a pretty powerful Yu-Gi-Oh card, but since the card's limitation, the deck has fallen off of a complete cliff. Now with the banning of Fabled Lori, that's also another indirect hit to a strategy that feels it was overcorrected. Phantom Yubel to 2 allows them to be able to insulate their combo and still gives them the decision tree of using that Phantom for material. It gives the deck back a little bit more strength and allows them to potentially contend again. One of the biggest problems with building a perfect ban list is that you have to be very mindful for unfair moments. Like an Exceed Yu-Gi-Oh strategy that can easily play a Fiendsmith Fusion Yu-Gi-Oh strategy, or a 1-card combo that forces your opponent to throw multiple interactions at it and then still have another engine to complement. Which is really ironic because the rest of semi-limited is Snake Eyes Ash and Snake Eyes Poplar. I think that these cards can come to 3 with original Sinful Spoil Snake Eyes banned, but I wanted to flesh out the semi-limited portion of the list, and these were the perfect cards. Now on for unlimited. Again, we want as many Yu-Gi-Oh strategies to be able to compete, but we also don't want situations where games feel really unfair. I've actually unlimited quite the few Yu-Gi-Oh cards that I think are going to be beneficial for the game. Everyone loves to be able to play some of their old school nostalgic strategies, and so long as they aren't counterproductive to the game, I think they're welcome. Which means that I'm unlimiting cards like Masterpiece, Drew Draco Slayer, and Dragonic Diagram. These cards have been on the ban list for almost 10 years, and power creep has definitely surpassed them. We once thought that Thunder Dragon Colossus was a card that couldn't come off the list, and here we are. I also think that there were some hits that were really unfair to Yu-Gi-Oh players, like Prank Kids Meow Meow Mew being randomly banned. I mean, yes, Prank Kids are a strong Yu-Gi-Oh strategy, but I think the biggest reason that it was hit was because it had multiple one-card starters. Notoria Sacred Tree felt like a really random hit to the Notoria deck. So bringing that card back alongside of Chaos Space will allow both Notoria and Dragon or Chaos-based Yu-Gi-Oh decks to be able to thrive under this list. Now, the last unlimited cards is Sun Avalon, Dryas, and Healer. Two cards that were almost awkwardly hit on the last ban list, but ironically, Sun Avalon is in the same position as Malice. It's a strategy that can never be the de facto tier 1 deck because of the counters presented against it, but is also incredibly rewarding to play, and with this boost will allow it to be able to compete against some of the stronger strategies a little bit more consistently. And one of the most important things about these cards that I brought off the list is that they can't be intermingled with the top strategies in the game. These cards pretty much get played in their own strategies to benefit their own Yu-Gi-Oh decks. You see, a lot of times Konami will hit a card to force you to play a new strategy, but if we're building a perfect ban list where as many decks as possible can compete, then this would be a fair conclusion. But class, that's all that I have for the perfect ban list. I really want you guys to let me know what you think. Of course, big dogs, your assignment as a Slifer Slacker is to either add or subtract from this list or make your own. And no, Kit Kalos should not come off the ban list because you said so. Provide a reason. Until then, the bell just rung, so make sure you check out these other videos so I can catch you on the next one.